Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Co-Creating the Buying Vision for Change in a Virtual Selling Environment. My name is Lindsay Wolf. I'm with Somersault Innovation. I work on business development with Ashley Welch, who's the co-founder of Somersault Innovation. And before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. I am going to be moderating the event today, but just to make sure that we can have our event be as interactive as possible, despite the fact that we're all on Zoom and not seeing each other directly. So you've all joined the presentation muted, and you'll stay muted throughout the webinar. However, you will have the opportunity to use both your chat and your Q&A box throughout the presentation. If you have any questions for the presenters, please use the Q&A box, and I'll be popping on screen periodically to ask your questions as it's appropriate to interrupt the presenters. And then you can use your chat box to answer any questions that the panelists may ask of you during the presentation. Please be sure to select the blue bar that says all panelists and attendees so that other people can see what you're asking or your comments, and you guys can have, some side chit chat as it's relevant, share resources with each other and so forth. I also want to let everyone know that as a reminder, we will be sending everyone a recording of today's webinar along with the actual slides within the next 24 hours. So you don't have to worry about that. You will be getting a copy of this recording and the presentation. So I think with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to kick it off to you, Tim, to get us going. So take it away.
Thanks, Lindsay. And you can interrupt at appropriate or inappropriate times. If there's something good, we'll just take it. Ashley and I, we're flexible that way. Ashley, welcome. Glad to have you. Ashley and her company, Somersault Innovation and Corporate Visions, have worked together at companies. And we thought, based on the work we've done together, maybe the reason that work works at those companies, we should share with others. So if you think of this, some of the organizations we work with, on day one, they learn some of the concepts I'm going to share. And then on day two, they learn the concepts that Ashley's going to share. But they all revolve around this same idea of creating the buying vision. And Ashley's extra co-creation here is very important today when we get to that section. So I'm going to take the first couple minutes and set this up. So imagine day one, and then I'll turn it over to Ashley, better known as apparently Wonder Woman today. So awesome. I'm feeling a little under costumed. Anyways, so these two numbers, if you guys have a pen and pencil in front of you, or pencil and paper, I should say, really sort of changed my view on a lot of things. It's Forrester research, and basically this research says that 74% of executive buyers, so these are executive business to business buyers, say they give the business to the company that creates the buying vision. And that 26%, if you're doing math with us here, is left for those who win what I will call a fair and square bake-off. And the idea here is the RFI, RFP, or whatever you call it. And some of you might be saying, wow, well, way more of our business goes to RFI or RFP than 26%. And notice what I said is only 26% are fair and square. So basically, you have a 3 in 4 chance of winning when you create the buying vision versus a 1 in 4 chance of winning when you show up where someone else has created the buying vision. Now, that's not news per se, but the question always is like, what does it mean? What does it mean to create a buying vision? What is a buying vision? And that's what we want to talk about today. How do you create the buying vision? So the first thing I want to talk about is what we've discovered in the marketplace, which is that when companies engage, you engage with a prospect, they've said, hey, we'd like to talk. The prevailing presumption is because they want to talk with you, there's a real deal on the line that hopefully either you're going to win or unfortunately, maybe the dreaded they will win. But we've seen time and time again that greater and greater percentages of these engagements end up in no decision. They stick with their status quo, that they don't feel compelled or moved to make a change. In some industries, on the low end, we've seen 60%, right? 60% of the interactions you have end up in somebody going, thanks, but no thanks, I think we're good. Some industries, financial services in particular, insurance and things like that, we see 80% of finals just basically go, you know what, I think we're okay. And we think the problem is that you're not creating a buying vision. You're not helping them, inspiring them to see the need to do anything different than what they're currently doing. You go in assuming what they want to know is why you and not somebody else. But the reality is 60 to 80% of the time, the people you're engaging with have a different question on their mind. They're asking themselves, why should I change? Why should I do anything different than I'm doing today? And that's what it means to create the buying vision, is you have to help the majority of the people you're speaking with capture a vision of what it looks like to do something different and better tomorrow than they're doing today. It is literally your job to create that buying vision. And if you can do that and they see the need to change, you win more than your fair share. You get a 3 in 4 chance versus a 1 in 4 chance. And you naturally create competitive differentiation by having built the buying vision and less worrying about spec for spec, feature for feature if you are different. So what does it look like? How do you tell a why change story? How do you create a buying vision? This next picture I'm going to draw kind of tells that story. And then Ashley's going to help us bring this sort of to life. I'm going to do an XY axis because Ashley, I'm going to lose my consulting card if I don't have an XY axis chart on there. It's right, isn't it? It's like mandatory. And I know you're going to show some Venn diagrams, so you get a pass on your card as well. So on this level, I want to put customer needs on this axis, and then your company's capabilities on this axis. So those of you listening today, I need you to think about this because I'm going to be honest. When you go and ask your customer, what do they need? You get excited because you find out a need, and whether you're a salesperson and you find a need and then you map that to a certain capability you have, and you're pretty excited because you think, I have a real deal here. They've got a stated need, an identified need, and I've got something that can solve for it. If you find a second need that they have and you have something in your bag of tricks that solves for it, at that point, you're like putting it in the pipeline and you're like, this is going to happen. If you find a third need and you map that to a capability, at that point, you're like, oh yeah, make it rain. This thing's going down and it's mine. The problem is you unwittingly end up in what we call the commodity box. This red box here is the commodity box. You think you did everything right because you asked your customer, that's VOC, voice of the customer, discovery or voice of the customer research. You found out their known identified needs and you map that to your known capabilities. But the problem is everybody's asking their customers what they need and then they're responding with what they have. And many of your portfolios are the same as your competitors. And you just unwittingly end up in this box. That's not creating a buying vision. That's you and the why you story, the one that ends up in no decision because there everybody looks the same. Lindsay, you popped on.
Tim, I love your content and I'm sure everyone else does, but I have like 4 or 5 questions of people wanting to know what whiteboard tool you're using.
So you know what's going to happen is they cannot hear anything else I have to say until I answer this question, right?
Right. That's why I interrupted so early.
All right. And I do not get a royalty. So it's not an application. I am using a Lenovo ThinkPad with a touch screen and it has a built-in stylus. And I literally put a blank PowerPoint slide up, just a white blank PowerPoint slide. And I'm just using the tray and I'm drawing on my Lenovo ThinkPad. I don't have multiple monitors. I am just sitting here on a laptop like the average regular person. It just happens to be a touch screen. So that's what I'm doing. Nothing too fancy. Thanks for asking, whoever that was. And now that everybody's got that out of their system. So the idea here then is what we see is to get out of the commodity box, people start to identify other capabilities they have. And you think you're going to create a buying vision by telling them, here are our value-added services. Here are our distinctives. And the problem is you call them value add, but the psychology of the customer thinks this is what adds cost and this adds complexity. So ironically, you say value add and they say cost and complexity add, and you are not creating a buying vision. The only place that a buying vision gets created is when you tell them something about a problem or a missed opportunity they didn't even know they had. We call these the unconsidered needs. And the problem with unconsidered needs is they are exactly that. they are unconsidered. You can't ask them what their needs are, and they can't tell you an unconsidered need because they're unconsidered. So what everybody hears is the red box needs and with the red box answers, and there's no buying vision because there's just nothing unique, nothing different, no need to change. But here you introduce needs that they didn't expect, problems or missed opportunities they didn't know they had. Problems or opportunities they had misjudged the size or the speed of. Problems or opportunities they thought they had solved for, but the reality is they had simply band-aided it. And you have to purposefully introduce these needs. And by introducing those needs, you send them on a path to these uniquenesses. So the buying vision starts with the needs they didn't know. I like to say that people want to be trusted advisors, but you are not a trusted advisor if you simply ask them what their problem is and then restate the problem back to them. You're not a trusted advisor, then you're a tape recorder. Trusted advisors live in the green box. They're telling them something they didn't know about a problem or missed opportunity they didn't know they had. And then that leads to something you can distinctly solve. So oftentimes people are like, well, how do I identify an unconsidered need? I'm going to teach you one quick way, and then Ashley's going to take you the rest of the way. One way to identify an unconsidered need is to take this thing that's a distinctive of yours and reverse engineer that into something where there's a real story you can tell them about a need that they didn't realize or didn't appreciate the size or speed of. Sometimes your unconsidered needs simply have to be those needs that they need to care more about. And the key is you have to introduce unconsidered needs because you can't play 20 questions. And again, Ashley's going to tell you about a very cool idea for how to do this using design thinking, but I want to give you just one example here. So so we worked with a company that sells fireplaces. I'm just going to pick an example we can all get our heads around here, especially as we move into fall, et cetera. And if you look on the left here, these are not atypical discovery questions that if you were buying a fireplace salesperson might ask you when you get in the door. How important is the fireplace to you, compared to other indoor features you might invest in? And what will you primarily be using it for? What kind of look and feel were you going after? What kind of budget? What are you looking to spend? Those are not atypical, but that does not create a buying vision, and that does not create differentiation, and that is not inspiring people to think differently, think grander or greater than maybe where they're at. We worked with an organization and we gave them this tool, very simple tool. Now, if you walk into this particular fireplace store, the salesperson will say, hey, I'm going to write down 3 numbers here for you. And they tell a story, 1, 710, and 4. And I'd encourage any of you who still have your paper and pen out to write down these 3 numbers. They tell a story. The thing about fireplaces is, and I know you're just about to put this in your new house or into your house, but resale is an important question to always ask. You may be selling in the future or not so near future, but someday you're going to want to know about resale and what your ultimate customer or buyer of your home cares about. Research has shown for the last decade that the #1 indoor feature that home buyers look for, your eventual home buyer who comes and looks at your home, is a fireplace. Sorry, #1 indoor feature. Talking and writing, that's the hazard. The #1 indoor feature. In fact, this number 710 is actually 7 out of 10 home buyers say a fireplace is frankly a must-have. And this 4 is that 4% of homes, only 4% have a premium fireplace in them, which essentially means that almost all homes on the market, 96%, have the same old standard fireplace. So if you don't get a fireplace or don't have a fireplace, you've reduced your market to 3 in 10 buyers, and you've also kind of commoditized yourself because basically everybody puts a standard fireplace in. So as you're looking for a fireplace today, let's talk about your eventual customer, the person who might buy your home, and how that will affect the fireplace you choose today. Interestingly enough, that's just a couple numbers and a simple story. Just 3 numbers and a story. And what it is, it's an unconsidered need. The unconsidered need here is the resale of your home and the value perceived by your future customer as to how the fireplace ranks, right? That's an unconsidered need, and it's certainly never going to get to that as you ask these questions here. Long story long, they were selling 5 out of 10 homes were getting a fireplace. They instituted this simple, what we call number play, unconsidered need number play. When they were done, 7 out of 10 homes that came in were new homes were leaving with a fireplace in it. And they went from 4% who were buying a premium fireplace to 40%. So they had a 40% lift in penetration, and then they got a 400% increase in share of wallet, if you will. And all they did different was not ask the typical discovery questions of the customer. They spoke to the unconsidered needs of that customer by speaking to what their future customer might want or need from them, and did that by introducing it as a story. So I tell you that because people are often like, what's an unconsidered need? What does that sound like? Where does it come from? And then how do you get there? Well, you introduce them. You can't ask your questions to get to them because by definition, they're unconsidered. So I hope that's helpful. But what I would tell you as I turn this over to Ashley, because when we met Ashley's company, Somersault Innovation, they were bringing this idea of design thinking to sales. I've always thought of design thinking in product development and a number of other cool areas. But here we are training salespeople how to have better conversations, how to create a buying vision, how to introduce unconsidered needs. And one of the gaping areas is people go, how do I find an unconsidered need? How do I get to an unconsidered need? And we hear that all the time. And then we met Ashley's company and her approach to design thinking for sales conversations. And so I'm excited to turn that over to her. But it first looks like Lindsay is joining us. Do you have questions, Lindsay?
Yes. Right before we have Ashley take over, I have a question for you, Tim. And the question is, can unconsidered needs be learned from your existing customer base?
You can't, my point is you can't question your way to an unconsidered need, again, because they're by definition unconsidered. So your job is to introduce a need they didn't know, or amplify a need they had undervalued, or reveal or unmask a need they maybe been band-aiding. And the only way to do that is kind of through a technique that I just showed. In fact, when we come back later, because I know Ashley's got a tight window here today, and then she has to go save the day somewhere else. The idea is we call this technique data insight question. The problem with asking open-ended questions is you're asking them to think of something they don't already know. What you saw in my approach was I introduced some data. It was number 1 feature, 7 out of 10 and 4%. Then I put an insight around that, which is if you don't put a fireplace in, you will reduce your market to 3 out of 10. And if you don't put a premium one in, you're going to be the same as 96% of those on the market. And so there was data with an insight. And then I can turn and say, so how should we be thinking about fireplaces today, right? So data, insight, question, as opposed to question, hoping somehow they're going to magically pop an unconsidered need on you. So that's one technique, is to go in there and launch it. That's the only way you're going to get them to know it. But again, how do you find them? That's, I think, still one of those things where I don't want to give away Ashley's thunder, but this was not a problem or a perceived need of the customer buying the fireplace. We had to tell them about a need they didn't think about, which was resale. Because they're not thinking about that at this moment, right? They're thinking, I need a fireplace. So anyways, Ashley, that idea of voice of the customer only getting you so far leads me to you and your insights around not only voice of the customer, but voice of the customer's customer. So Ashley, take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Do my desktop. Let's see if this works. And put this up. Okay. There we go. You see that?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So I'm not going to say too much about us, but Tim, thank you so much. I always learn so much from you, and it actually makes me a little anxious of things I need to do to get back.
Now you need a fireplace, right? You can't unsee that now. Oh my God! Everybody now, they wanted to know how I was drawing. Now they want to figure out how to get a better fireplace.
So as Tim said, we were lucky enough to partner together with a global telecom company who saw exactly what you said, Tim, like this intersection that was this perfect marriage between the way you're talking about creating or finding unconsidered needs and the how of doing that. which is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm the co-founder with Justin Jones of Somersault Innovation. I put this book up here, Naked Sales, that we wrote. It's full of stories and tools. If you're interested, you can find it on Amazon. We're only going to be talking about a small piece of our work, which is really in the discovery space. We work with many big clients, a lot of times in the tech space. And I want to start here with results, because I assume a lot of people that are caring about revenue results. So this is one of the clients that Tim's company and mine worked on together. And as a result of the work we did, which was some face-to-face coaching over 3 months and some online learning, total pipeline added was $56 million. Total revenue added was almost 1.5 million. And that's just on 6 global teams. Each team had about 13 account executives that worked on this project for 3 months. So I raise that now because I think sometimes you can see some of the stuff that I'm going to introduce is actually fairly simple and easy to grok. But so often in sales, I think we get obsessed with the numbers and the close, and we don't actually do this stuff. And this stuff matters. It makes a huge amount of difference in the revenue space. So I want to start with a story. This came out of this work that we did together. I'm going to tell the story and then I'll back into what it was that we're teaching. So this was UK Cancer Research was our AE's customer. And so as he was thinking about them, he said to himself, well, who is their customer? And one of the things he realized is one portion of this organization is to set up these secondhand stores in London where they sell clothing and other items secondhand. They make money in order to send it back to the cancer research. So he actually just went down to the store and he started talking to people that worked there. And what he learned was they used their iPhone to very crudely figure out how to price items. They would look up the item, they would find out what it was selling for secondhand in other places, and then they would price it. And he started to say, well, you know, this feels like an inefficient process to me. If we could make some other application for you that was able to actually give you the accurate price really quickly, would that be more effective? And they were like, yeah, actually, yeah. So then he started to talk to them some more about what is it, you know, who are the people that come in here and what are they really looking for? And what he heard, surprisingly enough, is that a lot of people come into the secondhand store actually looking for advice around cancer or to talk to people and be able to relate to their own cancer stories, which is incredibly unusual and surprising. And so he said, again, well, what if we could create a space? It was like a sound booth space where people could come in and consult with you on whatever they were thinking about. And they said, yeah, that would be amazing. So basically, through his discovery and really getting close to the end customer's needs, it became a $5 to $6 million opportunity that they were able to put forth in front of the client. That, like you were saying, Tim, sort of was completely unconsidered, I would say actually on both sides. No one was really thinking about this until it evolved by really understanding what the end customer cared about. And this is, of course, just one portion of the cancer research business. So that's what we're talking about here, is really putting yourself in the shoes of your customer and even your customer's customer. And this is what one of the folks that we worked with jointly had said. It's a long quote, but basically saying, you know, I like tech. I tend to jump into technology too soon because that's my comfort zone. I think that's familiar to many of us. We stick with our comfort zone, but you miss losing the client along the way if you can't talk about their business. He said, I'm loving this process. I've been doing this job for 25 years and the conversation has been the same. What's your wide area network? How's your service? Just like your questions you mentioned, Tim. He said, this approach takes you into the business, gets you talking about different things, and they forget about the competition. So I love this quote because it hit on so many things that we were talking about. So let's talk about discovery. So I have some eggs here because I think discovery is where you make or break the deal. It's really where I always think like the degree of discovery that you do is directly related to sort of the chance of success that you're going to have. And, you know, often I think discovery, we think is like, well, I'm going to try to figure out if they have a problem that I can solve. That's my discovery. And what we would say is actually, it's so much more than that. Sure, you need to understand sort of business technical basics, but it's the place that you differentiate yourself. It's the place where you become the trusted advisor, because what you want to look for is learning things way beyond what your solution solves. And this idea, if we go into discovery with a narrow view, and this is neuroscience, of like looking exactly for what my solution solves, that's exactly what we're going to sort for and listen for, and we're going to miss any kind of disconfirming evidence otherwise. You know, we miss all this other stuff, and that's actually where the unconsidered needs lives. So our encouragement is in discovery is just to stay open and to believe that discovery never ends. Certainly it's at the front end of your process, but you should always be looking to more deeply understand what your customer and their customer cares about. So that's our perspective on discovery. And we had actually started Somersault 5 years ago because we had just fallen in love with the power of design thinking, which I'm going to tell you about. And soon realized that there was all this like sort of magic tricks in the world of design thinking that could really support sales. And particularly in the discovery process, like designers themselves are just masterful at discovering insights about their end user. And so what we did is said, how can we borrow from this world of design thinking and give these tools and tricks to sellers? So what is design thinking? Well, most of you on this webinar are beneficiaries of design thinking, even if you haven't heard of it. If you've ever, you know, used an Apple product, used the Quip toothbrush, been to an Airbnb, any of these, you've been the beneficiary of a design thinking process. A design thinking process is usually used to innovate around products, services, or experiences. It's just a problem-solving process with stages and sets of tools. And what's different, however, about design thinking is it's ruthlessly focused on the end customer. So instead of coming up with, let's say I'm building a new cup for Tim and his colleagues, instead of me just coming up with my best idea for the next best cup, I just go and I watch Tim drink, and I watch how he consumes liquid morning, noon, and night. And I talk to him about like, why do you drink Diet Coke? Tell me more about it. And I just stay focused on him. And then as I start to create things, I'm constantly testing them with him. So this is sort of the overarching framework of a design thinking process. You always start with desirability, which means what does your end customer care about? And then you're thinking about feasibility and viability, which is where we, you know, more often tend to stay, which is feasible, like, can I actually pull this off? Viable, how much money am I going to make? And the reality is, if you focus on desirability, you're more likely to hit viability. If you can figure out what people really care about, you're more likely to make money on it. If you think about the Segway, for example, the Segway literally was built to transform transportation. Didn't so much hit the mark, right? So they could make it, and they felt like they could sell it for a reasonable price, but no one actually at the end of the day wanted to use it for a variety of reasons. So start with desirability. So this is our model, our sell by design model. We broke this desirability stage into 3 phases: discovery, insight, acceleration. We're talking about just discovery today. And the whole strategy in discovery is thinking about your customer's customer. So I've said this a couple times, and now I'm going to show you how to do it. And I just want you to sort of think in your own mind, sort of your headset is like, this is art, this isn't science. You're not going to get this perfect, and you don't need to. So if you had a Lenovo and a pen, this is when you'd get to take it out. Otherwise, you can use that same piece of paper that Tim had you bring out and do this for one of your own accounts. And when you go into this, the question in discovery is, how can we help our customers create more value for their customers? If you think about the UK cancer research story, that was the question they started to ask. How can we help them create more value for the people coming into this store? It's particularly around those booths. So that's the story, and that's sort of that's the question and a little bit the reframe for how you enter discovery. And I think when you start to do this, this is when you start to uncover unconsidered needs, things that you might not have known, and certainly the customer may not be thinking about in terms of what does their customer actually care about. Okay, so this is how you would map your customer's customer. Start with your customer, and I'm going to give you 2 examples. I'm just going to show you the framework, and then I'll give you a B2C and a B2B example. So you just like, who's your customer? And then start with who are their end customers. Could be there could be distinct divisions of customer sets that your customer serves. And then who do they touch within your organization, your customer's organization? And this is just about just start putting things down that you already know, or look at their website and say, actually, who are their customer sets? And then who would they naturally call into in the organization? And once you make this map, the whole idea is it starts to give you new ideas about where you actually can do your discovery. So I'm going to give you an example. So Lithia, they're a car dealership. They're one of the largest in the United States. I think they have 189 stores located, headquartered on the West Coast. So they have, this is the map I drew of, and crudely, so everybody can do this. So they sell, if you look on the left, they sell right from the dealership, right? You can walk in and buy a car. You can go online and just buy a car. You can go to the service center and get your car serviced. You can finance your car. So these are all different customers, sets of theirs. And then who would these groups touch? Sales, customer service, financing. I'm sure there are others as well. And again, the reason you're mapping this is because these interactions are interesting to figure out. Like, how do finance customers really feel about the financing options and how they engage internally? What's it like to buy a car online? So once you just see it visually, then you can start to think about, well, do I actually have a dealership near me that I could go to? Could I maybe say I was going to try to buy a car online? Do I need to buy a car, or do I have a friend who's buying a car from Lithia? And start to understand that experience, because when you do, all sorts of interesting information starts to get revealed. Tim, feel free to jump in any question. I'm going to give a B example, and then. So this is another real example that came in from the client that we worked with together. So Prosegur is a very large security company, headquartered in Spain. I think they're in 46 countries, something like that. You can see they have these 5 different divisions. And so the woman that we were working with was in Mexico, and interesting place to be looking at a security company. And so we did the same thing with her. We said, okay, take your client, Prosegur, and just start mapping out sort of the terrain of their customers. So this is a very simple version of what she did. And she said, okay, well, I'm interested, one thing that's interesting is like transferring cash. So she looked at how corporations, let's say it's a jewelry store, might need to move cash. So they would get an armored car. They would contract with an armored car division from Prosegur to move their cash. And the armored car would go to their bank and then back into Prosegur. So you can see it's kind of art. You could move these things around a little bit. And certainly there are many other sort of tentacles and lines that would come out of this if you filled this out. But so once she sort of saw this, she said, well, wait a minute. I have an account at Santander. So she went to Santander and said, can I talk to you about, your armored car and what's that like and what's happening in that division? And so she was able to talk to them at the bank and realize through them that one of their risks was that the drivers were sometimes using their own cell phones to make calls from the armored car. And it created a security risk, which, just saying that sounds like, isn't that kind of obvious? But apparently it wasn't. And this was a big problem for them. And so it's actually the place where they started to build a solution out to support them in how to create a more secure and risk-free environment for the drivers of those armored cars. So again, something she had never thought about, and then was able to use this as an unconsidered need to bring back to Prosegur and start to have a different type of conversation with them. So I'll stop there for a second. Tim, anything you want to say or add?
Yeah, so the one thing is, back in the day when solution selling was all the rage, they talked about why solution selling did or didn't work inside companies. And sometimes it was because a salesperson would bring a solution back to the company that they had kind of already promised to the customer, and it broke the company to try and do that solution. Mm. So if you do an unconsidered need, and you're kind of keeping an open mind about what it could be, and then thinking creatively about how your company could solve for it, how do you manage that towards stuff that the company can do, mm-hmm. and at reasonable scale, versus sellers coming back and getting a lot of rejections and no's? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where the co-creation motion comes in. We haven't really talked about that, but it's another sort of core tenet of design thinking, and one we believe should exist in sales too, which says, I don't want to go in with a solution that I came up with that's sort of fully baked and hope that I can bring you along and that you're going to buy into it. I'd rather come in with an insight, let's say, that says, hey, one of the things I understand by talking to the armored car division is at Santander, this is a problem. Have you considered this? What's your point of view? Let's talk about this. And is this worth solving? And then if so, let's figure out how we could solve this together. And so, just like this basic idea, the more you can get your customers' fingerprints on the solution you create, the much more invested they are in buying it.
Right. Well, and your own team, right? I think that's the beauty of co-creation, so that you're building something together that they want and that you can build at scale, as opposed to, again, breaking the company or building something substandard because we've never done it before. So I think that's the opportunity, is to treat this as the beginning of a dialogue that both sides are having, as opposed to, ta-da, we gave you something for this unconsidered need, and then my company's got to try and fulfill that. So okay.
Well, and it also goes back to that Venn diagram with the viability and feasibility. Like, those have got to be part of the conversation too, not just the desirability, so that you don't come up with something now that everybody thinks is amazing, but actually we can't pull off, or it costs too much to do and it's going to break the bank. And
one more question then the key then, like this whole fireplace idea that I shared, is how do you introduce this to the customer when it's unconsidered? Because I think we always say you want to make them feel smarter, not feel stupid.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, you didn't know this, that's never good. That's like, so somehow it's got to make them feel smarter because they just engaged you.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a lot about intent and how you come into the conversation. We're always saying the same thing. Like, you're not coming to your customer and saying, like, you didn't know this, or you're wrong, or that was so, ridiculous. Rather, you're coming with an intent. You're of being genuine. Like, I was genuinely curious. This is what I discovered, and I'm genuinely interested in what you think about this. And if you actually get sort of authentic insights that you found by doing this type of work, which is different than just studying it online, like you actually did the work yourself, then it is like you were invested your own time and energy, you care about them, and you're bringing it to them to be like, this is what I discovered. Curious what you think. And most of the time, I think it goes off pretty well. So I would say it's both intent and then what's the type of work you've done to offer them the insight. Okay, so the sort of what we say, like the animating factor here in doing great discovery is your level of curiosity. And a lot of times people ask this question, like, well, can you really teach curiosity? And I think you can. I think people are naturally more curious than others, but there's some real things from the world of design that help us stay curious and sort of open us up to hearing interesting information. And so I put this picture up here because I think in sales, often we think we're pretty curious, but in fact, often, as I said before, we're really curious about the things that we can solve for. We sort of aren't that curious about things beyond it's sort of this narrow view of what we can solve for. So, and the sort of the gold lives in this bigger picture of what you start to learn about your customer and their customers. So the invitation for you is to start listening or watching for these three things in any conversation you have with your customer or with their customers. You want to be listening for, what do people care about? Hacks or adaptations, and inconsistencies. And I'll give you an example of each. And these are, in fact, sort of, I think of like portals into more information. So when you hear or see any of these, this is your cue to say, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Or why is that so important to you? So what do people care about? What do people care about is when you see like high emotion, like, I really love this system, or this just frustrates me. That would be a place where you'd say, oh, Tim, that sounds like it's really frustrating for you. Can you tell me more about, like, why didn't that, Lenovo First ThinkPad work very well for you? Like, what got in the way? So you want to dig in and find out what's behind that emotion, because remember, emotion trumps logic 7 days a week in terms of how people make decisions. right? So you want to know what people care about. Even if you think you've got a very logical solution, if they care about something different, doesn't matter. Hacks or adaptations. These are great for salespeople. This means someone's doing something to get around a process to make it work for them. And what this is pointing to is an unmet need. And so if you can learn more about why they created that hack, you learn all sorts of interesting information. I just heard this great hack the other day. Technology firm working with hospitals. She went and walked around the hospital and she saw wheelchairs in the bushes outside the hospital. So she talked to them and said, why are these, I mean, I've seen a couple of these wheelchairs in the bushes. What's that about? And they said, oh, well, the technicians actually hide the wheelchairs because our tracking system for wheelchairs is so poor that we run out of them and we don't know where to find them. I mean, that's a crazy hack. So they started talking actually about how to track assets differently. Lastly, inconsistencies. You hear this all the time. This is a huge priority for us, but we really don't have budget. So that's a great place to say, like, well, that sounds like a bit of a contradiction. Can you tell me more about that? Or marketing says this and sales says that. Two completely different things. That's interesting. You want to dig in, not just blow by. Dig in, get more information, and I promise so much more will be uncovered. So I think that's it for me. I'm going to stop there and see if you have a couple questions, Tim, or from the audience.
Yeah, I think Ashley or Lindsay can come up if she's got any questions from the audience, but I want to talk about this inconsistency and contradiction thing. We often use this one too, where we look for, people like to be consistent with themselves. It's like, it's literally a neuroscience heuristic is to be consistent. And if you reveal an inconsistency, that is something people want to resolve. And one of the ways that inconsistencies often show up is if you plant a question about what they think is the optimal way to do something, and then ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you doing it? Yeah. And what you often then find is they know something's got to be done and is better, and they're not. But they're not sitting around wallowing in that inconsistency until you reveal that inconsistency to them. And then again, now it itches. Now they've got to scratch it. So it isn't always that you have to look for the inconsistency. If you've solved this problem for other organizations like them, you can actually reveal that inconsistency by asking a couple key questions. One about the optimal way, the better way, how they think they should be doing it. And then the other is, how are they doing it today and how satisfied are they? And then if you can add the third element, which is we work with dozens of hospitals every year, and here's what they're telling us. Because I always say that what you want to overcome is skepticism, and the best tool to overcome skepticism is voyeurism. Everybody loves to peek at others and see what they're doing, and then they judge themselves against those others. And again, I think unconsidered needs reveal themselves by bringing it in from others like them. Make your prospect or customer a voyeur on that, and then get them to answer those questions that put them in tension. How do you think you're doing relative to that today? And how do you think you should be doing? So it is the inconsistency contradiction thing, I think, is very powerful, just from the human neuroscience heuristic of I want consistency. Yeah.
And it's all about the authenticity again, in terms of, and your intent to, your kindness in offering up what you see as an inconsistency or discovering with them, right? They need to feel like you're on their team, not that you're pointing out something.
Right. And you're doing that because you've seen others like them. And what you're doing is you're giving them value by saying, we work, this person works in one hospital. Our organization works with hundreds of hospitals. So we're going to tell you what it looks like there, because we know you're so busy just trying to keep the wheels on your hospital, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But the wheelchairs in the bushes sounds like a scary story. Sounds like a thriller. Lindsay, do we have any questions?
Yes, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I do want to bring up one question that is a question that comes up a lot for us, Ashley, so you won't be surprised by this. But somebody said, as a salesperson, we don't often get much time with someone when we book meetings with cold prospects. Do you have any tips on how to do what you're referring to in a short period of time? Yeah. And so since I know you do have tips, I wanted to make sure you shared them with everybody.
All right, thanks. Yeah, one of the things I was just thinking about is this can even be your orientation to the questions you asked. Tim, you were pointing to this a little bit. Like Kyle Porter, who's the CEO of Sales Loft, I love, he says, I always start by asking about my customer's customer. So just start by saying, you know, tell me about your favorite customer. I'd love to hear about what they really value in your company, and start your orientation that direction. I'll give you one other story of a BDR who we were working with up in Toronto. He was working with a meat distribution company. He had been calling on the CIO. CIO picked up and was like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want your services. Please stop calling me. And Yusuf was the BDR, said on the phone, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just want to know how, when someone goes into a grocery store, how is it that they choose your meat and not somebody else's? And the guy said, well, that's the question, isn't it? And he said, all right, fine, I'll have a conversation. So just by reorienting the conversation around the end customer, it caused a trigger of someone to pay attention.
Hey, Ashley, if you don't mind, stop sharing. I'm going to show the stuff we're going to offer everybody. But I shared also that idea earlier about the data and the insight and the question technique, right? When we talked about sharing those numbers, one of the things I found, especially in the virtual setting, so there's the piece of data, then the insight, and then the question, is that when you have only a quick moment, if you get somebody on the phone say, hey, I'm not trying to sell anything, but we work with 100 hospitals every month, and these are write down these 3 numbers. This is what we're seeing out there. I just want to see if this is what you're seeing. And you share some data, and then you say, and here's what we're thinking about that and what we're starting to get from that. Hey, how is this affecting you? What we've learned in the virtual environment is there's no time for 20 questions anymore. It used to be when you got them and you were in person, you got a little bit of time because everybody felt obligated because the meeting had been set. When it's virtual, somebody expects something because I got to get something. And starting with a laundry list of discovery questions is not cutting it anymore. We've actually done the research that when you use data, insight, question versus question, answer, you actually increase the likelihood that somebody thinks they have a problem by 14%, because you gave them the data and the insight that anchored them. And then when they answer the question, they're more willing to admit they have a problem and admit a problem that's bigger than when you just ask them then open-ended questions. So there's something powerful about positing a data and an insight and then asking the question that causes people to believe they've got a bigger problem worth solving than if you just ask open-ended questions and they're still maybe a little bit defensive, or honestly, nobody wants to admit they're that broken. If you tell them how broken everybody else is, then they're maybe willing to admit that they're broken. Better, but still broken. So I just offer that as just something to consider for folks. Is it's a different world in the virtual setting, and the typical 20 questions just usually doesn't keep people as engaged as it needs to be. So any other questions that we got there, Lindsay, to ask? I'm just putting this up there so people can see both organizations are offering some free information on how to create value, build a buying vision, and so you can download these for free. Lindsay, were there anything else?
I do have a couple of other questions, but I'm wondering if, Tim, maybe we can pass them over to you since Ashley and I have to jump to our next session.
Oh, I can read those. And they, Wonder Woman has left the building. Thank you, Ashley and Lindsay. Appreciate it. I will pop these questions.
Love to hear from anybody on the call. Okay.
All right. And if, bye guys. If I can't answer these questions and they're questions for Lindsay and Ashley, what I promise to do is get them answered, and we will send them out in the email follow-up to everybody. Somebody said regarding contradictions, we need it, but don't have the budget for it. What do you do next with that? How do you address contradictions in a way that doesn't make them either defensive or helpless? So I think we've been talking about how to make them not feel defensive or helpless. It's to make them feel smarter, right? And usually it's couched in, here's what we're seeing in other organizations like you. And then you give them a chance to begin self-persuading. They start sort of putting themselves in that situation. So one way to think of design thinking is to give them the benchmark or the baseline from others you're working with. Reveal to them 3 things that you've discovered from working with those other organizations that they didn't know or didn't expect. And then ask them, how's that working, or what do you think about that from your organization standpoint? Now, again, they have a chance to be better than those other companies, but also be more willing to admit that they might be equally broken in some of those areas. The problem with design thinking, I think the question here is when they don't have budget for it. Have you identified a need they didn't expect, and now they got to buy something else or in addition? If you think back to the green box and the red box that I shared, the goal of unconsidered needs, ideally at some point, is to land them on those things that make you most distinct from your competitors. And the problem is when you try to insert those, if you remember the blue arrows, when you try to insert the blue arrow into the red box, people were like, that's too complex and I'm buying features that I don't need. When you introduce the green arrow or the green box, right, with the unconsidered needs, and it lands on those features, they go, okay, now, in fact, not only do I need it, that needs to be my top requirement, because those things that I didn't see coming are the ones that could hurt me. The things in the red box, gang, are the things that they already know and somehow are managing to keep the lights on and get business done. So I always argue that the way you do this is you find a way to integrate it into the story that they are looking to solve, and now make this the top of the checklist and your solution as the only one that has those things. So how do you teach these concepts to newer sales resources who may not have the business acumen to speak comfortably to these principles? Yeah, I think what I would say, gang, is that it is training. Both organizations offer training, and it does take a little bit of practice. So that method of data insight question, though, this is something you as an organization can think about creating a library of. That the fireplace company only needed one, but you might need a few. Data insight question, where you introduce a piece of data that gets somebody reframing a problem or leaning into a problem harder than they would have before, or realizing something they didn't before. You share a little story around it that causes them to begin to process and persuade themselves, and then ask a question to get them to take ownership. Just a simple method like that. And then once they know that method, as an organization, you should start building some of those. You should know and be able to find a few of these that are real good hot openings for your organization. So that's all we do have time for today. I want to thank Ashley and Lindsay from Somersault Innovation. We just scratched the surface of some of this stuff, but the idea here again is 3 out of 4 times you give yourself a chance to win if you're the one inspiring and creating the buying vision by introducing the unconsidered needs that they didn't have identified, and then being able to tell a story on how you uniquely solve those. That's your opportunity, and that can significantly increases your probability of win and gives you an opportunity to differentiate. So thanks again, everybody. Download these 2 free offers, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Corporate Visions webcast. Take care. Bye-bye.